we are here to talk about ways in which the practices and tools that are within SystemWise can be available for just-in-time things that might be surfacing in your work, in your universe. But that's really what these Wise Wednesdays are about. As we've been thinking about this first year of having an institute and bringing folks together, what we've seen is there's so many more ways in which some of the ideas that show up in SystemWise can be really helpful to authentic challenges that are happening in districts across the country throughout the year. So today we're going to talk about, the types of unexpected events. If you're here today, it's because you saw that title, I hope, and said, hey, crazy stuff happens all the time and it derails my plans. And I really want to be in a place where, it's still going to happen, but that I'm more ready for those sorts of unexpected events. So we're going to talk about some of the strategies that we have found really helpful for folks who are trying to scale initiatives across an organization, whether that's a district, whether that's a technical assistance provider, whether that's a school, whether that's a state education agency. But what are those moves that we have, and how do we do it in a way that really brings people to the table? So we're focused on the expected. Our emotional hope is that we're calm and we're pensive, just because we know that these can be anxiety-producing things, and we're really going to be thinking about how you can act, but also kind of assess where you are and think about some of those ways that you can attend to some unexpected things before they come up. So if you're with me, I hope that's why you're here today. The kind of flow of the day is I'm going to spend a little bit of time talking about some of the work and some of the big ideas from the book. We're going to do some sharing out and some just-in-time kind of live consultancy, crowdsourcing, and then we'll close with some resources and some additional next steps. So I imagine that this 45 minutes is going to go pretty darn quickly here. So our definition of a system is it's where crisis is a predictable and cyclical feature of how the work happens, right? So if you think about that, if you know that stuff is always happening, right? People leave, people come, budget challenges, new laws, new policies, new cultural things that you have to deal with. If that stuff is always happening and always kind of getting in the way of the work, congratulations, you work in a system. And because that's a defining feature of our system, we know that that's one of the ways that we really have to think about how do we drive change and not find those things as the blockers, but part of the context that we really want to dig into and explore. So if you're in the chat, start to use the thing. Anyone start to see unpredictable things this summer, things that were maybe unexpected? Programs and initiatives or curriculums that you are launching that all of a sudden are being pushed against by some level of government, or perhaps new uses of AI that you have to think about, right? Kids are using it to write all their papers, or you've started a new thing to try to make sure that people can use it, or cell phone bans. We've had large amounts of states that all of a sudden we can't have these things, and you've got to implement how you're going to do that in a way that makes sense. Or multiple changes, right? Like this is the environment we've seen. Funding pressures are up here. Yes, thank you, Erica. These are the sorts of things that we're seeing across the country, right? And while this moment feels particularly big, like as someone who's been doing this for over 2 decades, there's a lot going on right now. It's always been true, right? This always happens every summer, every fall, that these sorts of things. But it's not the only type of unexpected things that happen, right? Those all came from Ed Week. This is all from recent Ed leadership titles, right? Conflict is happening in our organizations, right? Who's had people leave? Who's had to deal with people not weren't able to work well together anymore? Conflict between a board and the superintendent. Conflict between principal supervisors and principals, right? These sorts of internal challenges that we hope won't happen because we want to be on the same page and working together, oftentimes continue to create an unexpected environment in which we need to work. And I think everyone who's filling that chat with so many of those other examples, right? I could have filled this page with so many different things. And so what we're really trying to get at here is the fact that there's some things that we know. And that is, those external forces that were on that first slide, those things that happen to us that are unexpected. those things that happen in the organization that are unexpected, early retirements, investigations, whatever those sorts of things are, that those things happen and that we can be a little bit predictable, even if we don't know what the particular thing is. We know those things are going to impact our time, they're going to impact the resources that we have available, and they're going to impact how people's values show up in their work, right? When certain things happen that are really big, people look at their lives and they say, this doesn't work for me anymore. Or, I used to think I really cared about, excellence and perfection on this sort of thing. And I've realized I've got these other parts of my life I need to lean into as well. And their values change. And so we know that these are the sorts of things that we can expect when those sorts of unexpected things happen. And so I have another question that's going to come up here. So we know that this is going to happen. And despite the fact we know it, organizations still oftentimes show up in predictable ways, right? So a crisis happens, an unexpected thing happens. And what happens? Whack-a-mole, right? People start playing that, oh, I got to serve this thing right now. This thing's popping up. And a lot of energy is spent not on the strategic thing that you might have built, but the emergency and jumping from emergency to emergency. We also see that a lot of the action ends up being less about solving challenge, but attending to emotion, right? Anxiety and fear. People start taking actions that, help them not feel so nervous, right? They might look for other jobs. They might do the thing that feels safe in their work or predictable versus the thing that might be a little bit more risky. We also know that during times of unexpected situations, there's a pivot to command and control, right? People start saying, I'm the person in charge. Information stops being shared, it starts being hoarded. The net information that is shared tends to be that, like, who do you know sort of information. And that the evidence people start caring about oftentimes is about perception and reputation. What are people going to think of the organization? What are people going to think of me? How do we look based upon how we're responding? So the question isn't what's going to be the right thing for kids, it's what will people think of us based upon what decision we might make in response to those crises. And so we share all this not to say, like, oh, these are really bad things. Like, those are skills that have served your organization well and has helped it to be able to survive. That's a reasonable response. And yet, if we want to disrupt it, we're going to have to be thinking a little bit differently about the work, right? So we want to be, if we're really thinking about crisis, we want to see it as an opportunity to adjust what we're doing and narrow our actions strategically to what's going to make the most sense to do based upon our context. We want to work counterintuitively and actually increase the number of people with whom information is shared and decisions are made, right? Our hardest problems need all of our brains, particularly those closest to the work. And we're so afraid often of the, like, how will people feel about it? Or what if they learn this sort of thing that doesn't look so good, that they panic, right? And then we want to be able to start to trust people. And then finally, that, the evidence that we're focused on is learning, right? How is learning happening? And what's the culture of our organization, right? We need to be thinking about how will people, right, young people and the people who work for us, be okay during and after the unexpected event. So our session today is to help you think about some ways to do that. Right. And so there's some big buckets we're going to talk about. And then the idea is we're going to, work with these and really think about how you might use them in your own setting with some of the unexpected things that might be happening in your context. And right, not all of them work for all situations, but if you're engaged in these sorts of things before things happen, you're much more likely to be ready to navigate the storms. And so some of the things that we think about are, what are the ways in which you can build slack into your plan, right? So when you build those, our principals are so good at this, right? Like, they know how to put the 5% here, 10% here, know where the money can jiggle a little bit for things. But where is that slack in terms of your resources to the degree that you can have it? Where are the things that you can get that have multiple uses? Same with people, right? There's, we've talked about this internally, that there are times when there's only one person who knows how to do something, and then something happens and you need to be able to make a pivot, and the person who knows how to do that is not available that day, or can't be pulled in two places at the same time, right? So what are those things that you've built into your strategy that involve that cross training, that involve bringing people together? The other thing that we talk a lot about is, Your first timeline is your ideal timeline. But when you're having that conversation, it can be helpful to say, you know, what does it look like if we only get this far in 2 months? What does the 1 year plan, 2 year, or 3 year look like? And how would we use our resources and people differently if we have to adjust our timelines? Again, this is one that's come up with as well, right? We're doing some big changes, as you might know, to the DataWise universe with new books that have been coming out, capturing our last 10 years of learning, with some new institutes and some new learning that we're going to be sharing over the course of the next coming months. And it involves a lot of people with a lot of timelines. And so our conversations are, well, we think this will happen by January. But if it doesn't, or only part of it, what does a really good version look like that, maybe we don't get everything we want until March? And so that's sort of, having an accordion version of your strategy can be really helpful, because it also lets you know what are the things that really have to happen by a particular date. The other one that we find really powerful is the more that your work is focused on empowering your learners. And as systems folks, our learners are anybody who's doing learning. So maybe in your case, your learners are your superintendents, maybe it is students. But the more that you're really giving agency to the folks who have to do the things and learn how to do the things, um, the more likely you're going to have plans that work. Because when learners own it, they end also a lot of the things that you think cost money and time don't cost as much money and time because people are just willing to do it, or they find other ways to do it. So oftentimes our barrier is that our desire for control versus our entire desire to give up control gets in the way of really doing this work. And finally, the clearer you can be about your values in advance, the easier hard decisions are to make. Right? Because without a doubt, unexpected things oftentimes mean saying no or not yet to something. And the more that those no's are not yet are based upon a shared sense of values, in our DataWise world, we talk a lot about building that shared why together. Um, the more that that's driving the decisions about what's a not yet, the more likely you're actually building the muscle for some of those other pieces in the future. So that's all well and good, and your crisis might have already happened. So when we think about when you're in the moment of unexpected, there's kind of 4 questions we want to leave you with today to wrestle with. And mind you, those four strategies, these 4 questions, and one additional piece are things that we're going to come back to here in just a moment. And so one of the things that we ask about is, when these things happen, there's oftentimes some of the work that you're trying to do where the resistance decreases. So what that means is, this thing comes up, this unexpected crisis. Let's do the one that we all know and love, have loved and lived with for the last 5 years is, you know, we had COVID and all of a sudden people were working from home. And all sorts of policies changed about remote work. All sorts of policies changed around technology and learning. Lots of the resistance evaporated overnight. That's a very big and clear one. And it happens with even the smallest things. There might be collaborations, with your public unions that might be easier in some of those situations. Right? Again, if you have those values down, if you think about, well, those strategy aligned opportunities for innovation, right? Like these are those opportunities, like they attribute to Dwight D. Eisenhower, right? Never waste a crisis, right? These are the moments where innovation can really happen. In many ways, oftentimes the problem with most of our unexpected events is we don't lean enough into what real innovation could look like, because again, we want to keep control. What would it look like if you really leaned into business communities or parents, or told people where you were struggling and needed to get some help from them? You'd be amazed what people are willing to do for their young people. And then keep asking what matters most, because what really happens in these unexpected situations isn't a conversation between one value and something that you don't value. It's really 2 values that you care about that are in conflict. And that part of the conversation you're bringing people to is, do we really care about agency here, or do we really care about community here? Do we really care about investing in early childhood, or do we really care about students with special needs in this moment? And those are clarifying challenges that we can come together. And I'm appreciating those that positive praise, Marguerite. I'm going to keep going and then get ready to turn the floor. Thank you. And then finally, one thing that we talk about with throughout the system-wise world is that everything is actually about learning versus success. We believe strongly that if you're focused on learning, success happens. If you focus on success, you rarely get there. And that when these unexpected things come up, for us to be clear about, well, what are our opportunities to learn about either ourselves, about our teams, or about our organizations? Um, and that is the core things that we want you to be thinking about. Maybe as you were hearing this, be ready for this because this is what the chat's going to be about. You heard something that you're like, ooh, this has me thinking about an unexpected thing that has already started up this year for me. And then finally, what we really talk about is, I've said it in a couple of different ways, is that when these unexpected things come up, this is the moment to be more inclusive than even feels safe, right? Because if you think about it, what's on the right of this slide here is what is called the Johari window. And basically what it talks about is there's stuff that you know and there's stuff you don't know. There's stuff other people know and stuff they don't know. And that oftentimes organizations live in this world of what we call shared evidence, the stuff everybody knows. And in a crisis or in an unexpected event, that is where your blind spots really start to show. And so if you're leading, you're going to lead into the things that actually exacerbate your blind spots, which is why having so many other people part of the conversation to kind of figure out your collective blind spots is really important, right? Those things that other people know that you don't, and being ready to share the things that you know that other people don't, right? Like they need to be able to make good decisions, and there might be key information that they need for that work. And ideally, when you do all of that, that truly unknown column gets a little bit smaller. So the ways that you do that is, these are some questions that we regularly ask as we think about what does really radically inclusive work look like. It's making sure that you have good feedback loops that elevate people from across the organization. So who aren't you hearing from? And how do you do that in a more mechanical way so it's always coming in? But we use that word loops because it's not just getting you information, but it's also making sure how are those people that you don't hear from are actually hearing you as well, whatever your tools are for that. And chances are they're not technologically based. They're probably interrelationally based, because many of the people you're not hearing from are the ones that don't fill out surveys. They're the ones that don't go to events. They're the people you're going to actually have to find ways to automatically get feedback, but in ways that reach out to them. How are we actually thinking about our vision of equity in terms of how we're responsive here? In our world, we talk about equity in terms of the experiences kids have, the cultures that are rooted around joy. Are the decisions we're making there to be more of that? Is it reducing access or increasing access? And then finally, what are those impacts on crisis for our structures, right? What are the ways that our structures can be adjusted based upon what's happening here so that they can be more about bringing folks together?